Welcome to Sea of Whales, the Whale Geek podcast, where whale watching and whale research meet. I'm your host, Shauna Prince, scientist and whale watch operator, bringing you conversations with whale researchers and ocean experts from around the globe. Let's dive in. Today, we're joined by Gail Davoren, professor of biological sciences at the University of Manitoba. Gail has been doing work here in Newfoundland, looking at predator-prey relationships in marine systems for over 20 years. Welcome, Gail.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
Thanks so much for being here. How did you get into marine science? So what led you to doing this?
Yeah, it's kind of, I'll make the long story short, but I grew up in BC and Victoria on the West Coast, and everybody was into marine biology. And I was like, I'm not going to be in marine biology because everybody else is doing it. And then of course, I grew up on the ocean and fell in love with it. So I started doing seabird work for my master's and PhD, but I was examining foraging behavior. And I realized that I needed to understand the foraging behavior of seabirds. I needed to understand the fish behavior that they were feeding on. And so that just kind of blossomed from there. And I came out to Memorial to do my PhD, and then have just kept coming back to do research.
Excellent. Can you tell us about your work in Newfoundland, what you're working on most recently?
Yeah, so I mean, sort of historically, I was working on seabird fish interactions mostly. That sort of blossomed more into capelin focused research, just because everything comes in the summer. All predators come in the summer to feed on capelin, as we know. So started doing a lot more capelin research and capelin, and then other predators. So looking at, I mean, most recently we've looked at jellyfish as a predator on capelin larvae. That's one of the things that we've started doing. Also started expanding our research to other forage fish like herring, which is again really recent, and sand lance, which is another sort of more recent focus. So yeah, that's mostly what I'm doing.
It sounds like lots of different projects. I know you have graduate students working on various different things, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. It used to be, and you alluded to this a little bit, I think people would have said cod was king here in Newfoundland. But I think probably more accurately, and maybe you'd agree, capelin are king in Newfoundland. And I often talk about on our tours how like the geology shaped the biology here. And so because we have beaches that capelin can spawn on, the cod came in, and ultimately that's why people came here and stayed here. And then various other industries sort of came up around the fishery, but initially people came here for that codfish, and the cod were close to shore because of the capelin being here. So can you tell me about the general health of the capelin stocks in Newfoundland and sort of what kinds of trends you're seeing with them?
Yeah, so we know, so I kind of came on the scene in 1997. So that's when I started my PhD. So at that point, the capelin had collapsed in the early 90s alongside the cod, which everybody knows about. So the population has basically, a capelin population has basically just kind of bumped along at that really low value since the early 90s. And there's been years where they've done, they look like they're coming back and they're doing really well. And then they're followed by a bunch of years of fairly low abundance. And you've probably seen that over the years as well. So, so no big rebound, and there's lots of research going on with people at the university as well, or multiple universities, as well as the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, to try and understand what's going on with the population and whether it's going to rebound to those like 1980 levels and prior. Yeah.
I remember being told at one point that if you took all the capelin out of the water, they would weigh more than all the terrestrial animals on Earth. My expectation is that that's not the case anymore. And we do definitely see, major differences year over year in capelin, in feeding patterns, in spawning beaches that we remember even in recent times, were much busier, I would say, than they are now. And it is certainly concerning when that's sort of what everything is here to feed on, when you see dips in numbers like that. What are some of the biggest contributing factors? Sort of what are the hypotheses about what might be happening with the stock?
Yeah, so I mean, forage fish, which capelin are a part of, and herring, they typically go through these boom and bust population cycles. So they're really high over a couple of years or even in 1 year, and then really low the next year. And this is all driven by recruitment. So the number of the individuals that make it from, um, basically post hatch, like right out of the egg, to when they're spawning. So for capelin, that's usually about 2 years or at minimum 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something happening in that kind of recruitment window, that is causing these boom and bust populations dynamics. And so there's a lot of research on, there's on the basically the body side or body condition, pardon me, of the moms.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe not producing as many eggs as they would have in the past, based on the fact that there's low abundance of really high quality food for capelin when they're developing their gonads. There's lots on predation, or just not ideal or favorable conditions when those larvae are really small. So um, Dr. Hannah Murphy has, and other researchers have shown that, recruitment, so how many individuals make it to that spawning population, really is determined in the first, several weeks of life,
Mm-hmm.
post hatch. So there's a lot going on. I mean, this is where this, the idea of this jellyfish project that we have on the go, came in, because we see these huge numbers of jellyfish sometimes in the summer. They're associated with these capelin spawning sites. And we think that, they're a generalist, or we think they're a generalist predator, and they could be, basically eating a whole bunch of these larvae, which could cause some of those population dynamics. So that's why we're trying to get a better handle on that. Hannah Murphy has looked at herring and whether adult herring are eating capelin larvae, whether the temperature or the conditions are just not good for growth in those first kind of month of life. And yeah, so there's a whole host of
There's so many
different
factors.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's hard to tie it down to one or two factors. Like, people ask, well, is climate change, is global warming causing this? And yeah, there's lots of questions about, yeah, that's probably, yeah, most
And
likely.
it's not just one thing, is my guess. It's
Yeah.
multiple things that have just compounded. It's a snowball effect kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have heard a couple of things. You tell me if it's true or false. Female capelin release 30 to 50,000 eggs when they are laying their eggs. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I think yeah. Yep.
Okay. So
yeah, depending on the size. Yes, depending on the size of the individual.
Yes,
obviously,
of course.
yeah.
Yeah.
So as the females get larger, yeah, they have more eggs. And I think more recently there was around 20 to 30,000 that, yeah, but it's huge. It's a huge number. But we're seeing smaller and smaller fish, which
Survival
means,
rates.
yeah,
It's a
lower.
strategy to overproduce, because the success rate is so low that then at least you'll
Absolutely.
have some that make it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so many species use that, but it also takes an awful lot of energy
Yeah.
to make that many eggs.
Yeah.
And we know that a lot of the males will die on the beaches fertilizing the eggs, because they're up there for longer, and they're, in the wave action, and spending some time fertilizing those eggs after they're laid. But with the females, once they've spawned, are there any that make it to subsequent years, or, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a huge question that we have some information, some studies on. Yeah, and we're thinking about collaborating to start. A bunch of us are thinking about collaborating to get that started, because that is a critical part. If some of those females survive spawning, then then, we're possibly, yeah, it just changes the way we would estimate population size and how we would
Absolutely.
model, population size into the future for
And how to support those populations if it's not just they
absolutely.
all die when they go on the beach and then that's it, so that's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
very different model. I know, I mean, we still do have a small commercial capelin fishery here in Newfoundland, which is at times can be controversial.
yeah,
Um, and so I have done some reading about how Norway changed how they fish these animals. So they were trying to get them post spawning if possible. So the idea being that the females are able to lay their eggs on the beaches when they come off, because then there's very few males and mostly females trying to kind of scoop them up then they're getting higher percentage of females, which is what they all want anyway, because usually for people who are listening who aren't aware, capelin are fished or were fished where they only wanted females for the roe.
yeah,
And I'm told that, studies had shown that they only are able to really lay about 1/3 of the eggs that they have. And then the rest are still in the female even after she's spawned out. Is that accurate? Would you think? No, it's not.
no, I think mostly they're considered batch spawners, which basically
Okay.
just means the females come in and release all of their eggs at once.
Hmm.
That's the more prevailing thought.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah,
So
so
then the
when
post
we
spawning maybe isn't the best way to fish them if you're looking to sell the roe, right?
yeah, if you're trying to
Um,
get the eggs, then yeah,
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 not so much.
yeah,
I know when I first came here, my first summer would have been 1999, and I remember going to harbors that were completely silver on the bottom with capelin because the buyers would come and look and say, too high percentage males, dump it. And they just dump it on the bottom. They were absolutely worthless. And, looking back, um, I know that it was, not long after the moratorium. I know that things were struggling and fishermen were looking for other species to make money. Um, and now it's done in a very different way, of course,
yeah,
in terms of what's done with, if with the males, for example, once they are separated out from the females. Um, but yeah, you have to wonder sometimes about practices like that when they didn't know better. And
absolutely.
we're just
Yeah,
trying to make a go of it after, their main species had been removed from the
yeah,
equation. But I'll never forget seeing that and wondering like, what are we doing?
yeah. Oh,
Um,
absolutely. It was
yeah,
very, very wasteful. And I think the aquafeed industry, so is maybe using those males. I don't know what the percentage,
yeah,
yeah, I'm not 100% up to date on
yeah.
that,
For fish
but
meal,
I
yeah,
would think that, yeah, for aquaculture, for feeding, yeah, for
it's no
feeding.
longer garbage anymore, which is
Yeah,
good.
yeah, I would hope. I mean, there's a huge market for aqua feed, so I would
Yes,
think that, yeah, they would be
absolutely.
using those, but I don't know what the percentage is in Newfoundland that gets used for that. Yeah.
And year to year it may differ. I really hadn't um put much stock into thinking about who eats the larval capelin, except that it's always been said here that the squid are coming to eat the larval capelin, and it seems
Oh,
like it's around the same time that they would be hatching. So um in Bonavista Bay in particular, we don't see as many squid here. I know historically there was a lot of squid jigging in Dunfield Bight, which is a bite off of Trinity Bight. But we don't see as many squid in this area as we do in Bonavista Bay now, and I'm not sure why that is. And some years they come, of course, and some years they just don't. But yeah, we were always sort of told that. But we have definitely seen squid coming right up onto the beaches after capelin, which is interesting
oh, that is interesting.
in
Yeah.
some seasons. Yeah.
I don't know if there's been a study on that. If there has been, I'm unfamiliar with it. So
Yeah.
that would be a neat thing to look at,
I'll
actually.
just
Oh
call you
boy.
next time I see something weird. I know we had family visiting from Nova Scotia, and my uncle said, I think we had been berry picking with the kids in the morning. They were going out for the commercial or for the recreational cod fishery. And while they're waiting, there's capelin rolling on the beach and squid chasing the capelin up onto the beach, and people are just picking stuff up in buckets. And he said, it would be really hard to starve here. So as much as things are changing, there still is an abundance of food here at the same time. It's just not
Yeah.
on the same scale that we
Yeah.
were seeing before, which is concerning for sure when we look at changes. Um, over time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, very concerning about changes to the capelin because we know that they're the basis of the food chain here. All of the seabirds right now are nesting and sitting on eggs,
Yeah.
sort of banking on the hatch being at the same time that the capelin are here to lay their eggs.
Yeah.
You had mentioned something about conditions for when the eggs are incubating and hatching. So can you tell me a little bit about what would be considered sort of prime conditions for that to happen?
Yeah, so we've done a bunch of studies on that, and I mean historically, so if you go back to sort of the Capelin Bible,
Mm-hmm.
which was Templeman,
Yep.
1948,
Okay.
they sort of suggested that the preferred or the optimal temperature
Mm-hmm.
for egg incubation for Capelin was between 2 and 12 degrees, and we found that in our long-term study area there on the Northeast coast that's basically it. If the temperatures are below 2 degrees, they're not, and the capelin are around, they're not spawning. They're
Mm-hmm.
waiting for it to get to that higher temperature. But again, if it's over 12 degrees, then they're not spawning there too. And so I guess one of the more surprising things, or not surprising because Templeman actually did describe this, but this movement from capelin spawning on beaches, because you mentioned that, right? Everybody
Mm-hmm.
sees capelin spawning on beaches, and if they're not spawning on beaches, they're not spawning, but they actually do move off and spawn subtidally, so in slightly deeper water, which I'm sure you're
Mm-hmm.
aware of as well.
Yes.
And yeah, so that was one of the more surprising things. And on the Northeast coast, we have a lot of what we call subtidal or demersal spawning
Mm-hmm.
that happens that's not on the beach. So a lot of people, like we've got gorgeous beaches up there, same as you
Mm-hmm.
guys, right? And
Yes.
and yeah, and we go out and check the beaches every second day, and we don't find any spawning. So that temperature is really critical. And we've done a lot of interviews with fishers around the province who basically would totally agree with that and just say, yeah, it just has everything to do with the temperature.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then when they come off, that's what we know when they hatch, I should say. Um, that's where we know a lot less about what's optimal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's been a lot of work early on by researchers that like Ken Frank and
Mm-hmm.
Bill Leggett that did a lot of research on, having the right temperature, having low predator densities, and lots of food available. So having those kind of optimal conditions, which they described fairly well, but that pattern seems to have broken down a little bit more post the Capelin collapse, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Hannah Murphy has shown is, that just we're not 100% sure about what those optimal conditions for the larvae are.
Yes. And again,
Yeah.
probably a whole slew of things impact,
Yep.
predation, temperature, salinity, turbidity, like all kinds of different things when they're that tiny can
Yeah.
really impact it.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting when you talk to the old timers, will say. So my husband's grandfather would tell you that they had two stocks of capelin in Bonavista Bay. And I'm sure you've heard this.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
ones that would spawn earlier than they do now, we're sort of into July before we see any capelin rolling on beaches now. They would have capelin rolling before school was out. So say early to mid-June, which is
Yeah.
definitely not the case anymore.
Yeah.
And then they'd have a stock that would spawn a little bit later on, and they were different in terms of body size. I would totally get it wrong if I told you, but one was bigger than the other. I can't tell you which one it was.
It was the
Now,
earlier ones were
was
bigger.
it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now we don't really have that, I wouldn't say, or we're not seeing that. So again, he would say some will spawn on the beach and some will spawn in the deep, as he would say,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what he would tell us about sort of what he remembers happening. But it's interesting too, patterns. One year it got really warm really fast. It was a really cool spring, and then it got hot. And it was a really hot and really dry summer, and we had capelin rolling on Labor Day weekend.
Yeah.
So when you look at what's normal, That's not normal. And when you look at then long-term survival of those larvae,
Yeah.
and I'm out there observing, but I'm not taking any measurements. And, looking at return rates then 2 or 3 years after when they are sexually mature, was that year one of those years where we saw a massive dip in this area? I don't know, because again, how do you even measure capelin biomass if you're just on a whale watching boat? Like,
Yeah.
well, it seems like a lot on the beach this year and there weren't any, last year kind of thing, right? So, I mean, that's not my area of expertise, but I can certainly, see that there are changes happening. But that year was very worrying when they were laying off and laying off and laying off. And because they're laying off the beach and not doing what they're here to do, then they're vulnerable to being eaten by
Yeah,
what we're watching. And
absolutely.
how does that affect it overall? And so when we have these weird years, um do you see then, after the fact that you can really see a big dip as a result of some of those changes?
Yeah, there's been a lot of trying to correlate those observations in during spawning and post hatching.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of attempt, especially in Trinity Bay by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So they have the spawning observations on the beach. They have biomass estimates. They have, spawning biomass estimates from their subtidal or deep water spawning sites or demersal
Mm-hmm.
sites, whatever you want to call them. And
Mm-hmm.
then they have larval surveys about a month later, so later into August and September, and trying to correlate, the number of eggs that were on the beach versus the number that they're seeing sort of
Mm-hmm.
right after hatching and then way later. And then, of course, they have their offshore survey in the spring before the capelin come in. So, trying to correlate all those things. And you think that it would be like, oh, yeah, well, we should see a dip the next year because we didn't see that many larvae. It's like, oh, it's
Mm-hmm.
not quite that simple. And yeah, just trying to come up with those mechanisms. There's a whole bunch of links that we still need to figure out. And some of those, like going back to what we were talking about before, might be related to um, yeah, just post-spawning survival. So maybe some of those we're not accounting for some of those females that actually survive spawning.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's just a bunch of links that we still need to kind of work out. Because you would think that that would be directly related. And when we're talking to the fishers, who are my most favorite collaborators,
Mm-hmm.
they're telling us all these amazing things. And I'm actually out there seeing that too. And yeah, and then it just doesn't relate to the population size in
No,
a
right?
couple of years.
Yeah.
And you're just like, wow, this is just, yeah, there's just more and more questions that keep coming up that we need to keep trying to answer. So
That's what science is, though, right? The
it
more you
is.
learn,
Yeah.
the more questions you have,
Yeah.
right? So,
Best part of it. Yeah.
yeah. So when we talked about the two stocks that Chris's grandfather would say there were,
Yeah.
is that still the case? And are some of these ones that sort of spawn in the deep, so we're not actually seeing them, or are we just down to one now? Has something happened to one of those?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of my work, research early on was trying to figure out whether, the deep water spawners versus the beach spawners, whether those were different populations genetically, or whether it was a choice based on
Mhm.
temperature. And so we actually ended up tagging a bunch of capelin and with acoustic tags and figured out that they're actually making a choice. So but as far as the timing, the individuals that come in earlier, we
Mhm.
also looked into that and were able to show, and other researchers had shown this in the past as well, before the collapse, that the larger, older individuals tend to come in first,
Mhm.
and then the smaller, um, younger individuals would come in later. And so, with the population being primarily composed of those younger, sort of 2-year-old and smaller fish,
Mhm.
that might be sort of one of the reasons that could explain why we're only seeing those later fish come in now.
Right.
So more due to sort of demographics and demographic patterns than specifically the kind of two population
Sure.
thing. Yeah, because I mean, early on we'd see several waves of capelin coming in. So and they were separated by a decent, a week to 2 weeks.
Yes. Yes.
And we were thinking, okay, these have got to be genetically different or something. But it
Not so
turns out
much.
that they're probably the same population. It's just in years where there's larger individuals, we might see them coming in a little bit earlier. And yeah.
And so the larger ones weren't necessarily older than the smaller ones, just bigger.
Well, no, they were usually larger and older, those ones
Mhm.
that came in. So the larger and older individuals would come in first, and the idea with that is that they would be potentially, one way to explain that would be the larger individuals can swim faster and
Mhm.
therefore make it in. So their gonads would develop. Most likely, the larger and smaller individuals, their gonads would develop at the same rate offshore potentially, but the larger individuals could swim faster. So they're the ones that would show up first. But maybe with the sort of smaller population sizes and only primarily the smaller individuals now, we don't see those separate waves coming in and spawning at those different times. Yeah.
And so I think you had mentioned before that, is that about the quality of food that's available to them
Yeah.
and the abundance of food that's available to them?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, these really lipid-rich euphausids or krill, a lot of people call them krill. Yeah, they've basically dropped out of the diet for the most part. More recently, I guess they've started to show up a little bit. And this is work by Department of Fisheries and Oceans that have looked through hundreds of stomach samples of capelin, and it's just an amazing data set
A lot of work.
and a huge amount of work, but it's really valuable to show that, why their body condition, why they might not, why they might not be producing as many eggs, these sorts of things. Yeah. Yeah.
And then couple that with maybe not producing as many eggs and then not having the same success rate with the larvae. You've got a perfect storm here.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Well, and it's not, but it's not just the number of eggs too. It's also the quality of eggs. And I know there's people that, not me specifically, but other researchers that are looking at that as well. So maybe those eggs are smaller. There's less energy reserves in there for that larvae to.
They're less likely to survive, even if they do hatch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or if they hatch at all.
Yeah. Exactly. That's another issue. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're well aware of who the predators of capelin are when they are pre-spawning or when they're of spawning age, I guess they should say. So we've got, various different nesting seabirds. We have codfish, we have seals and whales. So who are we concerned about when they are in the larval stage?
Yeah. So this could be so many different possibilities.
Yeah, because they're so tiny.
Yeah. So Dr. Hannah Murphy, I mentioned, she did, her and her student, her really awesome master's student, had done a study looking at, whether adult herring had capelin larvae in their stomachs. So difficult to do. They digest those little larvae digest really quickly. So it's really hard to see. So it's a tricky study to do. But jellyfish are another one. That was one of the big ones, even in the 80s. They just, we would expect. We're trying to figure out where those jellies kind of fit into the food web. That's one of my master students' work right now, is trying to look at that and just to see whether they could be, feeding on, like, we know that they're around, but are they actually feeding on capelin? So lots of flatfish would be feeding on the eggs potentially. There's been some work on that going back quite a bit, but yeah, there's anything you can imagine, any little invertebrate that's out there could be eating
They'll
them
take them
as
in.
well.
And like you said, it's hard because they're tiny and they would digest really quickly because they're, fairly simple animal. It's not like there's a lot of, large bony parts that are left behind or any of those kinds of things. So
exactly. Yeah.
How critical are the sea conditions at the time that the eggs are laid? I know I have read a little bit about sort of the wave action helping them to sort of sift down through those sedimentary layers and or layers of sediment, and then having them hatch, and then they kind of swim off the beach, or they're washed out to shallower water where they will then hatch. So, is it when we have Capelin weather for us, it's typically southern wind, the rain, drizzle, fog, and southern wind. As a whale watch operator, brings really big groundswell and people get sick. So we kind of tend to hightail it over to the Bonavista Vista Bay side where it's a little bit calmer. Are those wave conditions also important to the success of that larva at that time?
Yeah, so there's and I'm just trying to think of what the prevailing wind direction is. But yeah, if you imagine like for beach specifically, so the larvae hatch and they're thought to spend, well, we know that they spend time in the sediment before they emerge, like so pre-emergent larvae, and then they emerge into the water column. And there's a specific wind direction that basically creates these conditions that would cause them to emerge. So it's a temperature cue, a warmer temperature, and that's upwelling. So bringing in this warmer water that acts as a temperature cue for those larvae to leave the sediment and go into the water column. And the idea is that that warm water temperature kind of comes with low predator densities and high prey densities. So creating these favorable conditions. And this is this work by Dr. Frank or Ken Frank that I talked about before, which is kind of broken down a little bit, but that was the idea that those were the ideal conditions for those larvae. Okay. So that wind, that really critical wind direction that would cause that warm water temperature cue was thought to be really key. And if we didn't have that wind direction, then we wouldn't have those optimal conditions for the larvae. And Dr. Hannah Murphy has figured out that those optimal temperatures with the wind has kind of broken down a little bit, but yeah, there's probably again optimal conditions for those little guys coming off the beach to cue them to emerge. So yeah.
And I think, with other species, it might be possible to simulate these kinds of things in a controlled environment, but it's just not really possible with Capelin. There's so many factors that you can't do this on a small scale in an aquarium and then measure all these things. It's just not possible. It's too big of a system with too many factors to simulate that, in a lab. Yeah. And so so much respect for what you do, because it's not as simple as, A plus B equals C.
Oh, I wish. Well, no, it'd be boring then, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just out of curiosity, on average, because I know it would depend on many different factors, from the time the eggs are laid until the larvae emerge, how long are we looking at?
Yeah, that totally depends on temperature. So it could be anywhere from, 10 days to like over a month in some cases. So if you imagine like a warmish beach, so like 11 degrees, and it's about that in the sediments, it would be about 10 days to 2 weeks.
Okay.
And then at some of our subtidal sites where it's 5-6 degrees, then it could be 20 days or maybe even a little longer. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And when you talked about them choosing to spawn in different areas.
Yeah.
So let's just recap. Salmon return to the rivers that they hatched from. Capelin are not doing that then.
Yeah, I mean, this is an awesome question.
Yeah.
That is like the natal,
because you can't tag a larvae.
Yeah.
And then see if it returns back to the beach. So what's sort of the generally accepted idea for what's happening there?
Yeah, we're 100% not sure is the awesome way to put it, because we've done a whole bunch of work on, like you said, you can't tag those little guys, like they're 3 to 6 millimeters long when they hatch. Yeah. But what we've tried to do is, for instance, for for the beach, like do fish that spawn at the beach and do those eggs that are raised on the beach, do they come back and spawn at the beach? And same with the deep water sites. You know, if an egg is raised at a deep water site, do they come back later in a couple of years and spawn there? We've tried to get at this with otolith chemistry. So if you people would know about cod otoliths, so they're
Yes.
ear stones.
You can buy earrings here
So
made of
in the
those.
head, exactly right. So
Yes.
capelin aren't any different. They're tiny in a larval capelin. They're about 10 or sorry 12 or I'm getting this wrong, 20 microns, so
Oh, wow.
micrometers. So they're tiny, but you can actually determine the chemical, so the trace element composition, so the concentration of like strontium, barium, different chemicals, and you can use that as a natural tag, and then
Figure out
look
where
at
they came from.
to try and that's been a 15-year quest in our lab to see if we can use that as a natural tag. Not necessarily for natal homing, but to see whether, again, it's about whether these are different populations.
Yes.
And then also looking at relative productivity across bays. So, you know, is Trinity Bay more productive than Conception Bay or something like that? So
Yes.
we've been trying to use this otolith chemistry to get at that. And that's a whole can of worms that I won't get into here.
Wow.
But yeah, this has been on our minds, and the natal homing is really cool to try and figure out as well. Yeah.
Interesting. I know even in our area, close to Bonaventure Head, we have a couple of really significant spawning beaches. There's sort of 3 in a row. The middle one, there was a landslide a couple of years ago, and so there's a lot of very large rocks on part of the beach, which has sort of changed the makeup of the beach because it's changed the way that sediment is being sort of transported across that beach with this massive sort of like boundary, almost like a dam sort of thing happening. So we don't see as much spawning on that beach as we did before. And also on some of these beaches, just because of the way the cliffs are and the way that the shadows are on the beach, sometimes we see more spawning happening sort of in the shadowy places where maybe it's a little bit cooler than in, you know, in more bright spots where historically there would have been a lot more spawning. And then around the corner, there's this neat little inlet that we always take people into because we have some really interesting conglomerate rocks there that look all kind of lumpy and bumpy because they're eroding at different rates. But there's a very small capelin spawning beach inside that. And some years it's very well used and some years it's not. So is that, and actually when we were in there on Tuesday for our geology tour, there was still snow in there. So the way that the sun is hitting that is significantly different than every other beach where there's literally no snow anywhere else right now and hasn't been for weeks. So, you know, they know? Are they aware or self-aware enough to be like, we need to be somewhere where it's much cooler, it's too warm right now? And are they able to make a decision like, we will spawn in here this year or on this side of the beach as opposed to that side because of light and temperature and those kinds of things? And I'm sure that that's a question you would like to know the answer to
It
as
would.
well. Yeah.
Well,
but it's
I mean,
interesting to see.
Yeah, and the sediment, like bringing up the sediment, that's really critical. Like, so the spawning substrate. I think they would be making a choice based on that. Knowing about where an area is going to be cooler after they've laid, like they basically spawned,
Or maybe it just feels cooler right now, and that's why.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. We've monitored spawning sites for you know, well, 20 years. And so there's sometimes, you know, we know that the optimal temperature range, or we expect that the optimal temperature range is around 2 to 12 degrees. But once they come in and, you know, it's 10 degrees, they're drop their eggs and everything's great. But then a week later, you know, it's like 22 degrees or something like that.
And they gone. Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody's like, well, why would they have spawned there? Well, they don't know. They came in. It was great when they spawned and they left. And
honestly, if I knew what the weather was going to be like next week, you know, I would
Yeah.
be making millions right now, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
they don't know.
Yeah.
And even, with the nesting seabirds that we have right now, they are nesting. And, hopefully when the chick hatches, it will be at the same time that the capelin are rolling, but maybe it won't be, and they'll have to be going out further. And I know we've seen cases in some nesting colonies where the capelin have just been out so far that the
Yeah.
the survival rate of the chicks is much lower because they just can't feed the chicks as much as they need when
Yeah.
the prey is that far away. Right.
Yeah, that mismatch is really critical for
Mhm.
all species, but same with capelin, the mismatch with a good with good temperature. And yeah, I mean the substrate's really important as well,
Mhm.
because like you said, they'll mix, that'll mix in the sediment and create, opportunities for more oxygen. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, if there's those big boulders on the beach, they're, and
Just
if
doesn't work.
from that landslide, yeah, they might not use that area anymore based on
Yeah.
that. But
But there's so many beaches, not very far from there that if a stock is coming in, there's options. But then it's not a situation where, if they were a salmon and the river got dammed off, for example, which is happening where you're
yeah,
from, if they can't get there, then what happens, right?
yeah.
So it's good to know that they're probably able to make, game time decisions where it's like, this isn't gonna work.
I like the game time decision. Yeah,
Yeah, right. So
exactly.
they can move on down the shore and find something that does. And maybe it's that in Trinity Bight in particular, we have just the way that the rock's weather creates those types of grain sizes, because it
Yeah,
seems like we have a really large amount of beaches that have capelin spawning on them. So, I'm sure that that's not a coincidence either.
yeah,
Again, how the geology informs the how it affects the biology that's in the area. So
yeah.
it's always interesting. Um, what are some of the most surprising things that you found throughout your career? I know maybe some of the things you found that were surprising at the time are no longer surprising anymore, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess one of the biggest, like again, going back to the steep water spawning of capelin, like,
Mhm.
Templeman talked about it in 1948 and his report. And so we knew that this was happening. But I guess what we were doing early on in Notre Dame Bay is, you know, we were doing these larger kind of 800 kilometer kind of mesoscale, sort of larger surveys. And we were mostly like, we had a hydroacoustic system that was like an echo sounder essentially, and looking below the boat while we were counting birds and whales. And we used to find, and we still do, find these incredible areas where we needed 3 people counting birds. There
Awesome.
was just incredible amounts of birds and humpback whales in particular that we just couldn't capture it in our
Mhm.
counts accurately. Like there was just so many. And we were trying to figure out what was going on and why. And it was like year after year, it was in the exact same spot. And we were trying to figure out what was going on. And we got access to a remotely operated vehicle, and we dropped it down, and there was capelin spawning, and it was like everywhere in this 30 to 40 meter water depth. And
Mhm.
we had gone back and told our capelin biologists that this was happening, and they were like, "Oh, that's just this one year. It's not important, right?" And it was like, wait, wait, wait. And we're showing this year
Yeah,
after
and also this
year.
year and this year and
Yeah.
this year. Yeah.
Yeah, and our humpback whales that we've ID'd, there's individuals that are coming back to this exact same 10-kilometer square area every
Mhm.
single year, which I'm sure you guys see as well.
I definitely do. And my
And
guess is if we put an ROV down here, you would see something like
yeah,
that happening. Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
So I mean, and that just sort of started a career-long quest to look for, these subtidal sites in other areas. So we've done
Mhm.
work in Placentia Bay. We've found them, spawning in there on macroalgae, which again was super weird because we thought they were only sediment spawners.
Yes.
We're doing work in Fortune Bay, and this is where the fishers are just amazing collaborators. You
Absolutely.
just go out and say, "Hey, where are they spawning in deep
Mhm.
water?" And they're like, "Right there, right there." They
Yep.
can point to places on a
Yep.
map, and you go there, and they're exactly right.
Yeah.
And they just know that this is happening and this is important. And
It's
yeah, and
important to the
just,
survival of everything that they're commercially
yeah.
fishing, you know? So
Well,
yeah.
and super critical to, like, if the beaches are getting too warm, right? This is the
Mhm.
prediction
Yes.
that they have this option
Yes.
of potentially moving off. And so that was by far early on one of
Mhm.
the most, I mean, again, we knew it was happening, but understanding the importance at which it was happening everywhere and trying to get, people that are managing the stock on board to really think about that a bit more and understand it, and just the outcry from the fishers,
Yes.
that I was just, yeah, let's do this because this is really important, and you guys have been saying this for years,
Yes.
and let's have this incorporated into, stock assessment estimates and
Awesome.
considerations anyway. So that's been, yeah, that
That's a big
changed,
deal.
yeah, and it changed
Yeah.
the course of my career, working with these fishers and finding these sites and just,
Yeah.
yeah, having that
We have eyes on
collaboration.
the water, we call them every day, who are letting us
Yes.
know when they see things, and it really helps us out too.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
And so,
absolutely.
I mean, when there are people who work on the water every day, they have a different sense about what's happening out there. And I know when we have research teams come to visit, they, you know, utilize our knowledge in the same way. So things that they see when they're here for a week, when we've been watching these animals for some of them for decades, and day after day and hours a day with these same animals, the kinds of things we see and the data set that we have up here
Absolutely.
is very different than what a snapshot can do when you have a very narrow field season, just because of, the nature of the beast. This is how it works. You can't,
Yeah.
you can't be out there all the time, but they are out there all the time, and we are out there all the time. I'm not doing any fisheries research, but even the work that we do with the humpback whales and the sperm whales and the orcas and the fin whales, and so the things that we observe on the daily basis and the changes that we're seeing. And I really sometimes wish that in the earlier years I had kept better notes. I'm getting better at it now, but anecdotal evidence only goes so far. You need to have actual, data and proof that these kinds of things are happening. So it's always grateful to have the informed, not even just like opinions of what's happening and what people are seeing,
Yeah.
both from the people who work out there every day and then the people who are studying this at the same time. And I think if everyone works together, we do ultimately get a much more
Oh,
complete
yeah.
picture. And there was a
Absolutely.
time when I think scientists didn't, I don't know if it's necessarily scientists, but the old like ivory tower science sort of
Yeah.
model, where it's like I sit here and I know better than everybody else and I don't need to listen to anybody. But if you are looking at the knowledge of the people who have worked with these stocks for years and years and decades, and even the marks for fishing and things like that, why are those areas so rich? And then when you start to look at those, maybe those were always areas where capelin were spawning on the bottom, and that's why the codfish are there, or whatever the case may be. There are
Absolutely.
reasons for what they saw.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, super, super important, I think.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and honestly, yeah, the ivory tower thing is funny.
So
And
out.
I don't think, yeah, I don't think, well, I'm guessing there probably still are people that
Hmm.
think they know more than people who are out on the water all the time, but I'm definitely not one of those
No.
people. I just want, like, if I'm trying to find a deep water spawning site, the ocean, the ocean's a big place, right?
Hmm. Yep.
And
And
it's
she hides her secrets well.
totally right. So, I
Yes.
mean, what am I going to do? Go out and start surveying? I'm going to be in the
Hmm.
wrong area. I'm going to,
Yeah.
it just doesn't make sense to not
No.
work with people. And we hire like local fishers to do our research
Yes.
every year,
Hmm.
and that collaboration
Makes all
has
the difference.
has,
Yeah.
even just like, what have you been seeing before we got there, because we're
Hmm.
there for 2 months, and oh, it's just, yeah, they're
Yes.
amazing people.
And
Yeah.
every year is a little different. I remember one year you had a graduate student, Kelsey, working on
Yeah.
humpbacks, and she was getting very close to the end of her time in Newfoundland, and you hadn't had any whales yet. So I remember you be like,
Oh,
"Can
yes.
I send her to you? Are you seeing whales?" Because typically with them it goes south to north, and you're further north than us. So where are they? And then we had sort of figured out something, and the next day you messaged me, you're like, they're here.
They're here.
It's fine. Never mind. Yeah. So,
Yes,
you know,
that was the year that they didn't spawn up in Notre Dame Bay until
mhm,
like early
late.
August.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we were in a full panic. Yeah.
Yeah. Of
Like,
course.
how are we going to
Yeah.
do research on whales when they're not present?
There's no whales. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Valid.
Yeah. It was a
Yeah.
problem. It was a problem I
Yeah.
wasn't expecting.
Definitely a big problem, right? Especially when you can only be there for so many weeks.
Yeah.
Presumably you have to teach again in September. They have classes they have to go to. And so
Yeah.
if everything happens later, well then like we just missed it that year, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and you don't ever want to be in that position to have a big gap in your data set either. And what if that's the year that, solves all the or answers all the questions or solves all the problems or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, tough, right? So I know you have some very specific things you all are looking to gather data on when you're here this year. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. One thing that's kind of, well, both things are going on right now, but I
Mhm.
guess the more kind of thing that's happening right now is herring spawning.
Mhm.
And I'll give you a little bit of background on that. So I had a student, so I was talking about that olith chemistry.
Yes.
We were trying to figure out whether we could do this with herring. So long story short, last year she started, so Carolyn Curry started her master's, or 2 years ago, I guess now. But last year we were going out, we wanted to get herring eggs because we wanted to do some experiments on the herring eggs. So we asked people where the herring spawn, so people who were assessing the stock, and they were like, everywhere. I don't know, like they couldn't give us specific sites.
Yeah.
And so we were like, oh no, how are we going to find, again, big ocean,
Mhm.
how are we going to find these eggs? And so we put out this call to, everybody, basically, report your herring spawning. And the uptake was so incredible. We got a whole bunch of reports, up to, I think, close to 40 reports
Mhm.
from all around. And we were able to go and like actually collect eggs and do what we needed to do. And we got timing and all this stuff. And Department of Fisheries and Oceans was really interested in these data. So
Mhm.
Carolyn's now finishing up, but we figured we'd just keep this project running. So yeah, we're looking for date, location of spawning, if a photo, if people could send photos to, and we have a poster. I don't know if we can put the poster in show
Sure. I
notes.
can link it
Or-
with this when I post the podcast
Oh,
on
okay.
our social media. So I'll be sure
Awesome.
to do that for you. Yeah.
So, and then we just can create a map, and the timing is really important because a lot of information for stock assessment is it's relevant to that information.
Mhm.
So yeah, so we're putting out a call, date,
Awesome.
location
right.
for herring spawning. That's one.
Excellent. We saw some
Um,
last year and reported it. So hopefully we'll
yes,
see it again. This is
yes.
out from that area today, and it was around the same time last year that we saw it. So we'll keep you
Awesome.
posted. Yeah.
Yeah, we're starting to get, I think we have 10 reports already.
Excellent.
So yeah, and they've all come in the last couple of days. So I think it's,
Mhm.
early June,
Yeah.
late May, it's happening. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Excellent.
good to see
Excellent.
that. Yeah.
Great. And then you have another project happening.
Yeah. So again, we're asking the public to report jellyfish sightings. So we're interested in three, like moon jellyfish, lion's manes, and comb jellies. There's a whole bunch of different species within that, but just trying to get. So we're doing surveys on beaches, so walking beaches up in Notre Dame Bay again. We're doing boat-based surveys to get jellyfish densities, but that's just that small area. What we really want to be able to do is cover province-wide, because again, we know very little about the abundances and how they've changed over time and whether they're more abundant in different areas of the coast. And so we just want to get that bigger picture.
Okay.
So anybody walking a beach that's doing that,
Mhm.
we're asking for, again, date, location, general area is fine. Or if you take a picture on your phone, it has location right there. So if you send us the picture, then we'll have that specific location where that picture was taken. And yeah, the picture actually helps us with identifying the jellyfish as well. Um, but if you don't have that capability, just even sending us a text or an email, and just saying it was one of these three kinds that you have on your poster and approximate estimate of abundance. So, whether you saw 10, 1, hundreds, which can happen.
It does,
Yeah,
yeah.
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 So that's really useful information. And again, we're going to put it all together at the end of the season and get an idea of timing and abundances in different areas.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah,
I will put a link to both of those posters, the informational posters, in the
awesome.
comments when I post the link for the podcast. So our listeners can certainly start to send you some data.
Excellent. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And it's been so great talking to you today. I've really learned a lot. I know who my go-to person will be when I have questions about things I'm seeing out there with the prey species. um, but yeah, I've really learned a lot, and I hope our listeners really have enjoyed learning from you as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I had a really great time. Thank you for asking.
Maybe we'll talk again when your field season's over and see what
Yeah,
you've learned this year.
sounds great. Yeah, that would be
Awesome.
fun.
Excellent. I look forward to it.